Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the products you depend on. As you know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about medical devices, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I do have to specify I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. I'm a pharmacist, but I'm not your pharmacist. So this is neither clinical advice nor legal advice. I do these podcasts because they're on live streams because they're a lot of fun and I find myself learning something new every single time. But it's nice to know if someone's actually listening. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you want to find me, reach out to me on Twitter at Darshan Talks or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. I do also want to emphasize that if you like the questions we're having and you like the interaction we're having, please ask questions. Also, if you like the conversation, please reshare it. We appreciate that. So kind of getting to today's point, our guest today is going to be helping us discuss, and this is the plan as we speak. I expect it's going to evolve as we continue. But our goal today is really talking a little bit about FDA engagement. And if you are in any FDA regulated space, you know how scary that can be. So if you are interested in finding out how do companies, how do individuals interact with the FDA, what are the concerns? How do you plan for that? You probably want to listen into today's conversation. Our guest today is the SVP of Global Regulatory Affairs, Quality, and Operational Excellence at Syros Pharmaceuticals. We've had him on multiple times before. He is absolutely fascinating to talk to because we end up talking about everything from regulatory affairs to operational excellence and what that actually means. And it's been a pleasure having him on as a guest multiple times before, and I'm excited for today. So our guest for today, Ashley Preston. Hey, Ashley.
Good morning. Thank you for having me again. It's always fun.
Thank you for coming on. As we discussed earlier, you did get the memo about all of us wearing the same shirt and doing the beard with the mustache thing. So it's good to have you on. One of the things we were talking about as you were getting on is you were starting to have discussions with the FDA, and I'm sure that's the constant state for you anyways. But let's talk a little bit about when and how to engage with the FDA. If you have a new potential product, when do you start planning? What is the appropriate time to start engaging with the FDA? What are the appropriate milestones to get into? And let's kind of go from there.
Sure, absolutely. So I think it's the number one rule is engage early and engage as frequently as is possible and as is reasonable. But it's important also to make sure that you get the maximum benefit, if you like, out of your engagement. So I always take the rule that we don't have a meeting with FDA for the sake of achieving a meeting, but we want to achieve a specific outcome from that meeting, and we only call that meeting when we know we can have the data available to justify our position. Because typically it's a Q&A. So we are making proposals, asking FDA whether they agree to what we're proposing in our development program, and looking for alignment with them on that, and also advice if they agree or disagree. Really, they will still provide some advice as to that might shape your program. So key to that is having the data available to really properly support that justification, and that will get you the best outcome. So aligning your meeting around the availability of that data. Now, when we think about the earliest possible opportunity, really that by and large comes with the pre-IND meeting. So once you have a drug candidate identified, it has some activity in the non-clinical studies, and you are embarking on your IND enabling GLP tox studies such that you could file your IND, it's always good practice to file for a pre-IND meeting with FDA to make sure that you cover off any questions you might have around your IND, the content of that IND, what the studies that they may expect to see, any particular nuances around your product that you are concerned about or that you want to cover off with FDA. And that then enables them to have a more informed review of your file, and also avoids that lag time, if you like, where if you don't have your pre-IND and you're not aligned on some of these topics, then they will come as questions during your IND review. And that is typically a crunch timeline because, as you know, FDA for an IND has a statutory timeline of 30 days for their to review and make an objection to your submission, or give you a safe to proceed letter. So that can be a time crunch. So it makes a lot of sense for companies to approach FDA at the pre-IND stage, make sure they're aligned as much as possible for their IND, and then when it comes to filing, it's a much easier process and a much smoother pathway to acceptance of that IND and opening your phase 1 study.
So we're talking about this pre-IND phase, and we're talking about, as you put it, meet as early as possible, meet as often as possible, so that you're always going in the same direction. The two questions that come to mind for me is, number one, this idea of, during COVID, the FDA has been very, very busy, and the question is, how do you get the FDA's attention to give you those meetings, and have you seen delays?
Right. So I think you're right. The COVID has put a
Did that question make sense?
Absolutely. COVID has put a strain on FDA's resources, and I think that strain, whilst it's felt across the board at FDA, it's more acutely felt in particular divisions. Obviously, things like the antivirals division and CDRH is really stretched thin at the moment, and probably will continue to be for the foreseeable future, because there's so much activity happening in the COVID space for diagnostics as well as therapeutics. So, but in thinking about preparing for your meeting, when you file your meeting request, you are required to lay out your questions and rationale for why you're asking those questions, so that FDA can make an assessment of the type of meeting that can be granted. Clearly, during COVID times, face-to-face meetings are not happening, not that I'm aware of, and so it's almost a strategic point to not even worry about asking for a face-to-face meeting and go straight in asking for a teleconference, because the three options really: a face-to-face meeting, a teleconference, or written responses only. And FDA will make an assessment based on your meeting request as to what type of meeting can most appropriately address your concerns at that time. And that is dependent upon the stage you are in development, but also upon the criticality, if you like, of your questions, and whether they view that there is some need for a discussion around those topics, or if they're very straightforward, they may issue you a meeting that is written responses only, and at that point you put in your briefing book everything you have in terms of that content. You won't have a dialogue with FDA. They will give you their responses, and then you take those and you move forward. But ideally, if you can get some dialogue with them. So the experience we've had is that simply being as comprehensive as possible in the meeting request to help FDA to understand the criticality of the questions you want to ask and the topics you want to discuss. And then we have simply gone for applying for teleconference, because it makes it also a lot easier logistically for FDA to accommodate that. They are also have some level of remote working happening, and so that seems to be very a much easier path to getting that discussion. And we've had that several times over the past sort of year and a half, 2 years, and it's worked quite well.
So what do you think? Obviously, the advantages of a teleconference is, number one, the FDA is more eager to grant them. Do you feel like you are getting more meetings, or does it feel like you aren't getting those same number of meetings? It's basically just business as usual, just teleconference for the most part.
At the moment, yes, certainly in my experience. I know it can also vary amongst divisions. So at Syros, we're working with the oncology division, and they, as a division, are I would have to say leading the way in terms of expediting drug development, streamlining drug development, and also interactions with sponsors. So we have not seen any delays, but I do understand that there, due to resource constraints, there have been some delays across the board, for industry meetings. But perhaps we've been lucky in that regard. And I find the teleconference, I don't find it any less effective than the face-to-face meeting, because you still, really the key is being able to have that discussion. You submit your briefing book with your questions and your justification for your proposals. You get your preliminary feedback, and then you're able to refine that down to the questions that you want to specifically discuss with FDA. And it can be very important to have the opportunity to step the FDA team through the details of what you're trying to convey. not all of that can necessarily come across in a briefing book in a written form. And having that back and forth discussion, being able to sort of modulate on the fly, if something is, they have a concern about a particular area, you can have your expert there to discuss in a little more detail and sort of be flexible in how that discussion is handled and how that evolves. And by and large, I think it's definitely a positive, because you can then really fully understand the perspective of the reviewers. They get to also understand your perspective, a bit of back and forth negotiation, and come out to hopefully what is a win-win scenario for your development program and ultimately for patients.
So you talk about the importance of the teleconference. Let me ask a really basic question. My experience with the FDA, generally speaking, is that they don't like to be held too closely to what they're saying, because they're often sort of helping. It's a conversation. It's a discussion. Can you record the conference, or does it have to be sort of unrecorded and then you have your meeting minutes?
Yes, it's unrecorded. But the agreements are captured in the meeting minutes, and that's where part of that discussion process is to really to have the discussion on the topic and align between us and the FDA reviewers on what the outcome should be of that particular question. And then it's important for the regulatory folks in the industry who are managing these interactions to make sure that you also reiterate then, and it's clear to everybody before you move on to the next topic, what should be reflected in the minutes, what we all believe is the outcome of this discussion, and be clear about that. And if you have to repeat it, repeat it, because it's better to take that time and everybody be clear than to have some ambiguity and try and play catch up later on. Now, not everything is necessarily always captured completely as everyone understands it when the minutes come out, because it's everybody's human, and we that happens. But again, we do that, and when you receive your minutes, you review, you make sure that you are that it's consistent with what your understanding of the outcome of the meeting was, and you have the opportunity to discuss with your FDA project manager if you do see something that doesn't match up with your takeaway from the meeting, and you can have that negotiation with them as well, and they can engage the review team and make sure that what is reflected in those final set of minutes is agreed upon amongst the FDA review team and the sponsor, that was the outcome. Now, you might not necessarily always agree with the outcome, but that is the outcome of the meeting and their advice on that.
So speaking of that, speaking of this idea that you're having this discussion, the meeting minutes may not necessarily always reflect what you understood. Do you think it's a good idea to take meeting minutes and share that screen, especially since you have the opportunity during the teleconference, so that they're seeing exactly what you think you're hearing? Or do you think that that's gauche?
No, actually, we've had the experience. I've had the experience both ways. So I think it became a little more difficult during COVID because of the logistics of connecting the reviewers if they are remote themselves and into your call. But pre-COVID, we also had the experience with a pre-IND where the focus of the meeting was actually the meeting minutes draft were projected during the meeting, and our FDA project manager went through and actually wrote the draft of the minutes as we were agreeing on each of the topics, and we were able to then have that interaction in real time. And that was by and large a better way to go, but understanding that it's more challenging in the COVID times when not everybody necessarily at either end is in the same room.
But you don't think that a teleconference gives you a better opportunity to do that? Or do you think that and it sort of raises the second question, but I'll wait for that second question. What you described is they're projecting it in a live screen so that you're all in the same room, you're seeing the information being written out. I would think that works even better if I'm using a Zoom meeting or I'm using something like that, because it becomes advantageous because you get to see, you get to share this screen technologically. Or do you think that at a practical level, you're showing data and that screen's already being used and it's just not feasible to be jumping across multiple screens at the same time?
No, I agree with you. It's having the draft minutes projected in real time and being able to have the discussion on a topic, present your data, and then agree on what will be reflected in those minutes in real time is absolutely the best outcome. But it just, as it turns out, to do that, then you have to have both groups of people, particularly if FDA are projecting the screen, they are wanting to be in the same place down in Maryland. So, and during COVID times, that's not always possible. So I think that it's been a little bit more of a verbal connection onto the teleconference itself, rather than having the opportunity to project. But hopefully that we'll get back to that, very soon. And that is absolutely the optimal outcome in my mind, if you can't get a face-to-face meeting.
So let's ask the question that goes along with this, which is, there are obviously three different methods. And you mentioned them a few seconds ago: a real-time meeting, a teleconference, and a written response. The written response, the advantage is that you get it in writing. You have exactly what the FDA's perspective is. They can hedge it all the way they want, but you know exactly what they're thinking, and it's there in black and white. If you were choosing in, say, 2 years, would you choose a teleconference? What are the advantages and disadvantages to that versus a live meeting? Do you think it gives you more opportunities, less opportunities? And what do you gain by doing a live meeting that you can't in a teleconference?
To be honest, I don't see a lot of advantages necessarily in a live meeting.
That's interesting.
The disadvantages of the logistics of travel and so on. I mean, it's other than being face to face with the reviewers and that sort of personal sort of rapport, if you like, if you're there often enough to build up with them. But I think you can still get that on video. I think the world has shown now during a pandemic that we can operate, and we can have interactions like you and I are having now, via video, and it can be productive and effective. So, and I think it's to me seems far easier in terms of managing the logistics, managing the workload on both ends, to go this way, because I'm sure FDA can fit in more meetings virtually than having to accommodate all the logistics of the face-to-face meetings.
So one of the questions I have to ask is, I've been a part of many of these FDA audits and sort of responding to the audits and all the good stuff. And one of the things you do is you have the FDA room where you have the one person taking notes, the scribe, if you will, and then you've got a separate room altogether where you're actually doing the battle planning, and you're kind of going, FDA is asking for this. What do they actually need? Do we need to give this document? If this document, does the whole thing need to go, or is it just an individual component, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? My question for you is, that is often seen as a little bit more of an antagonistic relationship in the case of an audit, because you're trying to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and you're not sort of exposing everything as much as you possibly could. On the other hand, in the case of a application and what an application can look like, I imagine there's more of a collaborative approach. But do you have, in the case of a teleconference, a separate room that you are going, okay, we need this expert lined up because the FDA may ask these questions, but we don't want to expose them until we know? So that, like, is there a protocol you guys have for these conferences, or do you sort of go, look, I've done 1,000 of these, I know how to handle it?
No, so when we get our preliminary responses from FDA, we'll take a look through and hone in on the questions that we want to address with them during the discussion, and we'll make sure that we have our experts in those areas who can speak to that content on the call itself, and they will be available as that topic comes up to provide their input, present the data, be part of the discussion or the negotiation, suggest options. Should we be looking for alternatives? And so we have them available definitely on the call, because it's, I think, to me, the role of the regulatory affairs expert in the FDA interaction is to facilitate and manage that discussion, to make sure that from an overall regulatory perspective, we have what we need to be able to move forward and execute on the strategy. But we always, drug development is a team team game and always will be. And so we absolutely rely on the expertise of our SMEs in a given area to provide that content that we can then, whether it's a meeting or crafting a submission, regulatory will help to synthesize the data and craft the narrative, if you like, craft the story of the drug such that it is persuasive for the submission or for that discussion.
So, which obviously speaks to the idea of having people available, but how do you address the question of who does the talking, who decides whether we're going to bring this expert in this moment, or do we keep them out and do we just ask the questions? Like, is that something, for example, in your role? Do you go, I'm gonna have the meeting, I'm gonna be the one talking, and I'll pull in experts as necessary? Or do you go, I don't want to be the one talking because I want to be the one planning, and I want someone else asking the questions? Like, how do you plan that part of it?
Right. I see. So really, it comes down to rehearsal, practice. Practice makes perfect, and also, so we will have before the meeting we'll have a rehearsal of the meeting, and typically that involves also the SMEs presenting. So what would normally happen is we would receive the responses. We would want to ask, we would want to center our discussion on these three key topics or key questions that we've received response from FDA. And we would identify who is going to, if we have additional data to present, who is going to present that data. And typically it would be the SME. I feel that's the best way to go. They have the clear expertise and the deep understanding of that subject matter. But as the regulatory expert, we would probably tee up that discussion, maybe position it, by sort of establishing first what we have proposed in our briefing document, acknowledging what FDA has given us, and maybe setting the stage for our counter proposal, and our SME doctor, whomever will provide the additional detail, and then the discussion then ensues. And we will be there to facilitate. And if we see something that we want to hone in on, or particularly gain particular agreement on, and understand the impact of that, particularly if on other areas or on our regulatory strategy, then it's up to us to hone in on that and interject with that additional question or information. And then finally, once we reach that, it's then for the regulatory expert to then facilitate the agreement and alignment, and ensure that is sort of very clear to everybody what the outcome is of that discussion, what will be the actions moving forward, and then to facilitate onto the next discussion topic. So it's facilitation and sort of leadership of the meeting, and making sure that we have all the pieces come together in the right way, and harness the best out of our SMEs.
Which sounds like the best way to proceed, but here's the question I have, and I've been in this situation once or twice before, which is the SMEs obviously have their opinion. They're very, very smart. And the FDA comes in with a different opinion. And they're struggling with this idea of FDA, yes, I recognize you have concerns, but I'm the expert in this. And you're seeing the tone change into being more argumentative, sort of explain your side of that situation. How have you dealt with that in the past? Have you sort of pulled the SME and gone, thank you so much, this is great? Or do you go, this is an opportunity for the FDA to tell us what they want, not an opportunity for us to argue? Or do you go, no, this is when I get to put my best foot forward and position it so that the FDA understands where we're coming from? How do you mentally approach that?
So personally, I really try to hone in on the key leadership facet is communication, and in there listening and really understanding, because at the end of the day, folks at FDA are no different than us. They get up in the morning, brush their teeth, take their children to school, and so on and so forth, and they go to work. And their mission is to make sure that their constituents receive timely access to quality, safe, and efficacious medicines. And our job in industry is to develop quality, safe, and efficacious medicines for patients. So we are actually heading on the same path. Along that path, we have certain things that we need to meet, and certain aspects that we have to see, both for the regulator side and for industry. And so really acknowledging that, understanding that, and asking the right questions, and really being open and kind of empathetic to the perspective of the regulators and the review team, as to understanding what they are trying to achieve and what do they need to see because often it's not necessarily the specific sort of objection, but there is something underlying that they need to see or they need to understand in greater detail, or perhaps they are also seeing they have the advantage, let's remember, of seeing everybody's applications. We have the depth of knowledge in our product. They have the breadth of understanding across the board. So there are things that we can learn from them. They may be seeing something with somebody else's product that then triggers a concern with ours. We don't have visibility of that, but just being open and empathetic to that and driving the conversation, that's for the regulatory expert to make sure we dig into that conversation as far as we possibly can to understand what's driving that objection and how we can possibly reach a solution based, again, on scientific discussion, on the guidance that FDA has put out, and also making sure that we can, as far as possible, have a win-win scenario. And there's always a way, really. I mean, it used to be that regulatory was seen as the policeman, put the stop sign up, but really we're the GPS, because there is a way to navigate, through a product, through development, assuming it's going to be ultimately effective. But there's always a way to get that data. It's just really being interactive and partnering with FDA to navigate that path and to delineate that path.
So, as you can tell, we can obviously keep going forever, and we always do this, but we're well past our 15, 20-minute mark. We're about 26 and a half minutes. So I do need to start wrapping it up. But as you know, we're going to ask you 4 questions. So the first question, what would you like to ask the audience?
So I'm interested, obviously we would have a lot of regulatory professionals listening in and interested to understand their own perspective. And are they, one, to your question, are they seeing delays, and what are their key tips for interacting with FDA in the most productive and positive way?
I love it. My next question, what is something you've learned in the last month?
Well, in the last month, I've learned that having a 5th child is a lot of fun, but it reminds me of the joy of having a little newborn in your arms, someone who's completely dependent upon you. So I've relearned that in the last month, having our new baby arrive, which has been such a joy.
First of all, congratulations! That is so awesome. It's so amazing.
Thank you very much.
And I think that in the times of COVID, I think the best part of it is you get to have the time to actually spend the time with the baby, which maybe at a different time you wouldn't have had as much time. So thank God for little things.
That's right, and she has no shortage of arms to hold her around this house. So she loves it.
I'm so glad to hear it. I kind of know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask you this anyways. What's something that made you happy in the last week?
Well, yeah, looking at the smile on the newborn's face. I'm calling it a smile. It might just be a random reaction, but I'm taking it, keeping it.
I think that's fair. I think we should count it as a smile. And the last question, I asked you this, but I've been flashing it throughout. How can people reach you?
Indeed, you can reach me at my work email address. There it is, apreston@syros.com. You can reach me under Ashley Preston at LinkedIn. There you go.
Perfect.
And also via these podcasts, I'm sure there's a link there.
Absolutely. You can always reach out to me and I'd be happy to connect you. And as always, Ashley, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. We'd love to have you on again. So thank you again.
It's a pleasure, as always. Thank you.
Let's schedule one soon.
Indeed.